Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good evening. Salam Malaysia Madani. Salam UiTM hatiku. To Professor Madya Dr. Haji Muhammad Shahnawi bin Muhammad Firoz and to whoever is watching this video. My name is Ahmad AZIMUDDin bin Azran, metric number 2025166591. Today I'm going to present a general review regarding an industrial relations that I use in this subject, which is industrial relations, regulations, and cybersecurity. Journal case that I chose is National Union of Employees in Companies Manufacturing Rubber Products versus Comfort Rubber Gloves Industry Sdn Bhd as the defendant, which is published on 2025. This case mainly discusses the enforcement of collective agreements, trade union rights, employer discretion, annual salary increments, and the jurisdiction of the Industrial Court under the Industrial Relations Act 1967. Throughout this presentation, I will explain about the facts of the case, which is the storyline of the case, the issues of the case, the judgment, which is the conclusion or the decision of the judge in this case, the analysis and critique, and finally the references. Moving on to the facts of the case. So the dispute began during the operation and expiration of the 7th collective agreement between the union and the company. The dispute started from 1 January 2020 until 31 December 22, which is the 7th collective agreement was officially enforced. On the 1st January 2022, the first annual increment after the expiry of the agreement became due. However, the company refused to pay the increment because the excuse is that the collective agreement had already expired. Within the year of 2023, negotiations for the 8th collective agreement took place. However, both parties failed to reach an agreement and negotiations. And moving on to October 2023, the company stopped deducting union dues through the takeoff system. Until 30 January 2024, the company formally rejected paid leave for a union executive council member to attend a union meeting. Moving on to 5th February 2024, the union representative was supposed to attend the meeting, but the company refused paid leave because the meeting's purpose was somehow unrelated to company affairs. And to 21 February 2024, the union filed an S-form application in the Industrial Court claiming non-compliance. An S-form is an official application filed under Section 56 of the Industrial Relations Act to enforce a collective agreement, which is done by the union. On the 5th March 2024, another Industrial Relations Department meeting was actually scheduled in Ipoh, but it was cancelled after the matter was referred to the Industrial Court. Finally, on 13 February of 2025, the Industrial Court delivered award number 223 of 2025 and dismissed all complaints made by the union. Now, I'm going to point out the issues of the case, or you can say what I'm questioning about the case. So the first issue, does the Industrial Court have jurisdiction to hear a complaint regarding checkoff under Article 90, or does it fall outside the definition of a trade dispute? This issue concerns whether the court even has legal authority to decide the matter. For the second issue, was the company obligated to continue deducting union dues after the expiry of the 7th collective agreement during negotiations for the 8th collective agreement? This issue examines whether obligations continue even after a collective agreement expires. For the third issue, did the company breach Article 10D(2) by refusing to pay leave for a union representative to attend a meeting that was eventually cancelled? This issue here is whether refusal of leave was lawful despite the meeting being cancelled on later time. For the fourth issue, is the company legally entitled under Section 6 of the Industrial Relations Act 1967 to refuse paid leave when the union fails to explain the meeting's purpose? This concerns the statutory requirements for trade union leave. The fifth issue is, does Article 10 requiring prior approval give the company absolute discretion to reject trade union leave application? The sixth issue is, do the continuity clauses in the seventh collective agreement require the company to continue granting annual increments during negotiations for the eighth collective agreement? And the last issue is, did the company's refusal to grant increments in 2023 and 2024 amount to non-compliance under Section 56 in the bracket 1 of the Industrial Relations Act 1967? This final issue focuses on whether the company violated the law. Next, I'm going to talk about the judgment of the case, or you can say the ending of the case. Let us examining the judgment. The industrial court, a majority decision. This means the chairman and the employee panel member agreed together, while the employee panel member disagreed. The court ruled that the union failed to prove on the balance of probabilities that the company has breached the seventh collective agreement. As a result, all complaints by the union were dismissed. The court therefore sided with the company. Now, I'm going to talk about the analysis and the critics of the case, which I'm starting to present about analysis first. For the first analysis of this case is strict jurisdictional boundaries. The court carefully separated into enforcement under Section 56 from interpretation under Section 33. The court treated the union's complaints strictly as enforcement matters. As a result, the court refused to expand or imply meanings that were not really expressly written in the collective agreement. Why is that happening? The court likely adopted this approach to avoid judicial activism. The court believed it should only enforce clear obligations already existing in the agreement rather than create new obligations. This reflects a conservative legal approach, emphasizing certainty and legal discipline. However, this strict approach also limited flexibility in protecting workers' interests. The second analysis that I found in this case is heavy reliance on precedent or stare decisis. Stare decisis means courts follow earlier judicial decisions or precedent, while the court relied heavily on previous federal court decisions, especially the case of non-metallic mineral products manufacturing employees, Union versus Malaya Glass Factory Berhad. The court concluded that Chekhov is not considered a trade dispute and therefore cannot continue after the expiry of the collective agreement. The justification is the court likely wanted consistency with higher court decisions. For the third analysis is statute overriding contractual agreements. The court ruled that Section 6 of the Industrial Relations Act overrides Article 10D of the collective agreement regarding trade union leave. This means statutory law was considered superior to contractual promises. Why is that? It is because the court believed statutory requirements must always prevail over private agreements. The law required the union to prove is the purpose of the meeting and that the meeting concerned the employer's affairs. This demonstrates how legislation can limit trade union rights even when broader rights are promised contractually. For the fourth analysis is pragmatism in industrial negotiations. The court reasoned that granting annual increments. The chairman stated that if increments are already guaranteed, the union may have less incentive to compromise during negotiations. It is because the court applied practice negotiation logic. It wanted a preserved bargaining balance between employers and unions. However, critics may argue that employees should not lose salary progression simply because negotiations are delayed. Workers are financially affected while waiting for negotiations. And for the final analysis is rejection of equity in favor of legal formalism. The employee panel member argued the company acted in bad faith or niat jahat. The employee panel believed The company intentionally weakened the union by stopping the checkoff, denying leave, and withholding increments. However, the majority ignored these concerns and focused only technical legal compliance. This is because the majority believed courts should focus on written law, technical compliance, and statutory interpretation rather than moral or emotional considerations. This reflects legal formality. While legally disciplined, this approach may weaken industrial harmony and trust between employers and unions. Now, I will discuss or point out the critics of the judgment in this case. This section explains why some aspects of the decision in this case are a bit controversial. First is selective application of the continuity clause. The court acknowledged the existence of continuity clauses in the seventh collective agreement. However, it selectively decided that those clauses did not apply to checkoff or annual increments. This creates inconsistency. If some part of the agreement continued after expiry, why are other important employee protections excluded? The judgment appears inconsistent in determining which rights survive and which do not. This may create uncertainty for future industrial relation disputes. For the second critique that I would like to point out is the rigid concept of trade dispute. The court maintained that the checkoff is not a trade dispute. This interpretation may ignore practical and industrial realities. When employers suddenly stop deducting union dues, unions will lose financial resources, and then union administration weakens. And lastly, industrial harmony may deteriorate. Therefore, even if technically not a trade dispute, check-off strongly affects labor management relations. The court's rigid legal interpretation may therefore be disconnected from real workplace conditions. Next is unfair burden on union meetings. The court gave substantial power to the company in deciding whether union leave applications were acceptable. The company rejected leave because it claimed that it could not envisage or visualize the meeting occurring during the working hours. This standard is highly subjective, meaning based on personal opinion rather than objective facts. The decision potentially allows employers to reject union activities too easily. As a result, workers' trade union rights may become weakened. For the next critique is contradictory use of section 40 in the bracket of 3. The section 14 in the bracket 3 is supposed to protect employees from less favorable terms. However, the court used the section to impose stricter limitations on workers' leave rights. This seems contrary to the protective purpose of labor law, because labor laws are generally intended to protect weaker bargaining parties and also namely employees. But instead, the court's interpretation arguably strengthened employee control. For the last critique, ignoring the timing of meeting cancellations. The court justified refusal of leave because the meeting was eventually cancelled. However, the union argued that the cancellation notice and the refusal of leave occurred under confusing administrative circumstances, meaning the court did not really fully analyze whether poor industrial harmony contributed to the cancellation itself. Therefore, critics may argue that the court focused too narrowly on technical facts while ignoring the broader relationship problems between the parties. So here are my references that I used in this case. So that's all for my presentation. Thank you for watching and Assalamualaikum.